Robert McNamara. A name that might not ring a bell for everyone, but trust me, his impact was monumental. Sounds like a used car salesman, right? Well, he wasn't selling cars, but he sure knew how to sell ideas and strategies. Well, he was actually a pretty big deal. McNamara was a key figure in corporate America, a man whose decisions rippled through industries. This guy was a numbers whiz, a regular Einstein of spreadsheets. He could see patterns and solutions where others saw chaos. He made his name at Ford, turning the company around with his sharp mind and even sharper suits. His innovative methods and keen eye for detail were legendary. He was the ultimate organization man, believing in the power of data to solve, well, everything. To him, numbers were not just figures, they were the key to unlocking success. Then came the fateful call, a call that would change not just his life, but the course of history. President Kennedy, impressed by McNamara's business acumen, asked him to be Secretary of Defense. It was a role that would test all his skills and more. It was 1961, and Vietnam was becoming a growing concern for America. The stakes were high, and the pressure was immense. McNamara, armed with his trusty slide rule and an unshakable faith in statistics, figured he could fix this little war just like he'd fixed Ford. He believed that with the right data, any problem could be solved. Oh boy, was he in for a surprise. The complexities of war were far beyond the scope of any spreadsheet, and McNamara was about to learn that the hard way. McNamara brought his data-driven approach straight to the Pentagon. Known for his analytical mind and precision, he was determined to apply the same principles that had made him successful in the corporate world to the military. No more wishy-washy military assessments. He wanted cold, hard numbers. McNamara believed that with the right data, any problem could be solved, even the complexities of war. And what better way to measure progress in a war than by counting bodies, right? The logic was simple. The more enemy soldiers killed, the closer they were to victory. Thus began the era of McNamara's math. This approach turned the grim reality of war into a series of numbers and charts, making it easier to present to the public and policymakers. The more enemy soldiers killed, the closer America was to victory, or so the thinking went. This method, however, had its flaws. It reduced human lives to mere statistics, kill ratios, body counts. These became the yardsticks of success, even if it meant inflating numbers or ignoring the bigger picture. The focus on numbers often overshadowed the true cost of war. It was like judging a chef by how quickly they could chop vegetables, completely ignoring the taste of the actual meal. The essence of the war, the human suffering, and the broader implications were often lost in the numbers. Now, McNamara's math might have worked if the Vietnam War was just a simple equation. But it wasn't. The war was far from a straightforward problem that could be solved with numbers and calculations alone. It was a multifaceted conflict that involved not just military strategies, but also deep-rooted political ideologies and cultural complexities. It was a complex mess of politics, ideology, and jungle warfare. The terrain itself posed significant challenges, with dense jungles and unfamiliar landscapes that American troops were not prepared for. The political landscape was equally complicated, with various factions and interests at play. And unfortunately, McNamara's calculations were based on some seriously flawed assumptions. These assumptions didn't take into account the resilience and determination of the Vietnamese people, nor did they consider the broader geopolitical implications. Take the domino theory, for instance. This theory suggested that if one country in Southeast Asia fell to communism, the surrounding countries would inevitably follow, like a row of falling dominoes. This was the idea that if one Southeast Asian country fell to communism, the rest would follow like, well, dominoes. It was a theory that oversimplified the region's unique political and cultural landscapes. It was a simplistic and ultimately wrong way of looking at the region's complex dynamics. Each country had its own unique set of circumstances, and the idea that they would all fall in the same way was a gross miscalculation. Then there was America's unshakable belief in its technological superiority. The US believed that its advanced military technology would easily overpower the enemy. B-52 bombers, napalm, Agent Orange, surely this high-tech arsenal would bring a swift victory. But technology alone couldn't win hearts and minds, nor could it navigate the intricate social and political fabric of Vietnam. But they underestimated the tenacity of the Viet Cong and their ability to adapt and fight back. The Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics. blending into the local population and using the terrain to their advantage, making it incredibly difficult for American forces to achieve a decisive victory. Section 4. The human cost of data-driven war. Behind all the charts and graphs, it's easy to forget that real lives were at stake. McNamara's obsession with numbers masked the devastating human cost of the war, both for the Vietnamese people and for American soldiers. Villages were destroyed, families torn apart, and countless innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. American soldiers, many of them young draftees, faced a brutal jungle war and an enemy that seemed to disappear into the landscape. The physical and psychological scars of the conflict ran deep. Section 5. The McNamara haircut, a metaphor for detachment. And let's not forget McNamara's hair. Yes, you heard that right. His hair, always perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place. It became known as the McNamara haircut, a symbol of his cool, analytical approach to war. It was the perfect metaphor for his detachment from the chaos and carnage he was orchestrating. While soldiers were fighting and dying in the jungles, McNamara was in air-conditioned rooms, moving numbers around on a map. Section 6. McNamara's late regrets and the price of hubris. As the war dragged on and the casualties mounted, McNamara's faith in his numbers began to waver. The public grew increasingly disillusioned, questioning the government's rosy assessments of the war. By the time he resigned as Secretary of Defense in 1968, McNamara was a changed man. He'd begun to express doubts about the war, doubts that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In his later years, he publicly admitted his mistakes, acknowledging the flawed assumptions and tragic consequences of his actions. Section 7. Conclusion. Lessons from a data-driven disaster. McNamara's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of relying solely on data in complex situations. It's a reminder that war is not a spreadsheet and that human lives cannot be reduced to mere statistics. The Vietnam War was a tragedy on an unimaginable scale, and Robert McNamara